Hello everybody and welcome on into my Firestaff Rapier build for the Medley Fair patch. With the coming changes in this patch, I feel like Firestaff Rapier is at the strongest point that it's ever been right now. It's a really good patch for Firestaff and a really good patch for Rapier, so yeah, this build is feeling pretty good. This build has really good damage, it has excellent mobility, pretty decent amounts of healing power, and it's very good at surviving because it is a very slippery spec. There you see that 5k backstab off of this setup. Yeah, I am loving this build, this patch. It just hits people so hard. And on top of it, I'm using Incinerate instead of Flamethrower like I was in the past. And I'm actually falling in love with it thanks to the access to Grit. If you guys have kept up with previous iterations of this build, I have made quite a few changes this patch. So I hope that you guys like what I've kind of come up with here. And of course, if you want to see a written guide to this build, you can find it on my website, pvpnewworld.com. There's a link down below for that too. There's also some PvP with commentary at the end of this video if you want to see some more of the build in action. And without further ado, let's take a look at that build. Starting off, taking a look at the attributes on this guy. 150 Dex, 209 Intelligence, and 150 Constitution. Seeing as Rapier is the damage dealer of choice for this build, a mix of Dex and Intelligence means that we're going to get a lot of damage out of the Rapier. Now, I've gone with this particular split for a couple reasons. 150 Dex for the reduced cost on your roll by 10 less stamina. That's a 20% cost reduction on your dodge roll, and I find, especially if you want to do something like play a light armor build with a Rapier up close against people, having that additional stamina sustain is a huge deal and makes it a lot easier to play. Not only that, but this is going to be great for breaking distance from opponents. It makes this build very hard to catch, very hard to pin down. Now, taking a look at the intelligence side of things, the really important one we get is at the 200 mark in intelligence, gain 10 mana after a dodge. With this perk, we actually don't need to have any other mana sustain outside of this and our regeneration potions. So definitely want to have 200 points in intel if you can. And then taking a look at Constitution, the really important one here is that minus 10% to critical damage taken at 150 Constitution. Yeah, this is a big deal for PvP, so you can benefit a lot by having at least 150 Constitution on a build like this. I think, again, if you're going to be doing any kind of up-close fighting in a light armor build, I would highly recommend 150 Con, especially if you are outnumbered. But on this build, I can't go for 200 Con because we really need to get that 200 and 150 jump point in both Intel and Dex. Of course, the jump points of Dex, 10% crit chance, really nice for our Firestaff and for our Rapier. The thrust damage is not super important, but it does give us a little bit more damage. The 10% critical hit damage, absolutely fantastic for this build as we have a high crit rate on the Firestaff and we do a lot of backstabs with the Rapier. And of course, that 15% increase to elemental damage, very important for our front weapon and the Firestaff. We have the Abyssal Gem on the Rapier, so that's going to benefit from this elemental damage increase as well. So let's take a look at the gear I'm running on this guy. I'm going to start off with the Rapier. We took a little bit of a peek at it, but this is the Rapier of choice for a build like this. Sundering Riposte, Rogue, and Shirking Abyss. I would like to have one that has maybe Keenly Empowered instead of Shirking Abyss, but any of the Shirking perks are really nice for this kind of a setup because we're going to be doing a ton of rolling, so it's very easy to get that additional damage. But if you can't get a perfect 3-perk Rapier, of course, just go for Rogue and Sundering Riposte. Rogue is a huge damage increaser when we get those backstabs. 19% more backstab damage, very nice. And then Sundering Riposte has a 24% rend this patch on the Rapier. This is super huge because that rend sticks to your target, so even if you swap to your Firestaff, they will still take that 24% additional damage. Very powerful, and it makes it so that if you do manage to hit someone with the Riposte, they're going to be taking a ton of damage from the rest of your attacks. And then taking a look at the Firestaff, I have Keen Speed and Empowering Fireball. These are the two perks that you definitely want on the staff for this build. I really like Keen Speed this patch, 20% haste for 10 seconds on a 10-second cooldown. I do have Alacrity on my amulet here, so that will give it a 30% bonus. So 13 seconds of 20% haste on a 10-second cooldown when we land a crit with the Firestaff. This build has, I think, around 36% crit chance on the Firestaff, so it's very easy for us to keep up Keen Speed almost the whole time while we're in a fight. And then Empowering Fireball on the Firestaff gives 57% additional damage now. This is huge. It just allows this build to actually hit some pretty huge fireballs, even if we don't have any other debuffs or empowers going into it. And even at 200 intelligence, I've been able to hit people for almost 4k fireballs on this build. So definitely liking the empowering fireball, especially for finishing off targets. And then taking a look at the perks on my gear here, I've got Stable Incinerate and Resilient. Stable Incinerate is a must-have, I think, if you're going to use Incinerate on the Fire Staff. It adds grit to Incinerate, which makes it so much more powerful to use because you're not going to get knocked out of your Incinerate as often as in previous patches. And the ability to gain grit like that actually adds some good defensive capabilities to Incinerate that it kind of didn't have before. The 11% additional damage, always really nice. In general, Fire Staff is hitting quite a bit harder this patch thanks to all these perk changes than it was in the previous patch. Moving on to the next piece here, I have Resilient and Physical Aversion. Physical, Elemental Aversion, or Shirking Fortification are definitely the off perks that you want here. And if you have a perfect 3-perk gear, something like Refreshing or Freedom would be the icing on the cake to finish it off. Last patch, there were a ton of people using bows, so Physical Aversion made a lot of sense. This patch, I actually see a ton of people using magic and bows, so both the aversion perks, I think, are equally useful for a build like this. Ideally, though, Shirking Fortification is probably the way to go. It's just very expensive to buy. The next piece I have here, Physical Aversion, Resilient, Omnidirectional Evade. I love Omnidirectional Evade. It's only a 9.9% in power, but it adds to all the additional damage that you get after you use an evade already. On top of it, the Omnidirectional Evade duration will actually stack if you can reuse the evade before the 2 seconds are up. So if you're light attack chaining into evade really often, you can get like an 8 or 9 second Omnidirectional evade in power buffs. So really nice in that regard, but in PvP, it's not super realistic to be chaining a ton of evades in a fight. Either way, this just adds more offensive potential to it. The next piece here, Resilient Shirking Energy. Shirking Energy is a must-have in PvP in a light armor build. If you don't have it, definitely get it. For this build, we've got to have it for sure. Healing Tomb, not any use for this build, but nice if I choose to play some Ice Gauntlet. And then on the last piece here, I've got Efficient Burnout, Physical Aversion, and Resilient. So Efficient Burnout, I think, is a really good perk for this build, and just in general for Fire Staff, that 19% additional fire damage on your next attack after you use Burnout, and of course an increase to your mana regen rate. Not super important because this build does not hurt for mana in combat at all, but it just adds more damage. So you can have your Fireball, for example, hit even harder if you use Burnout into Fireball. And a huge combo that this build can do with these perks is something like Sundering Riposte. Let's say you stun 2 or 3 players with it. Go for a big Incinerate on them to put in that burst damage and the burns. Roll backwards, go for the burnout through them, and then hit them with a super juiced empowering fireball at the end. This combo can do a ton of damage very quickly to a lot of players, and I really like it, especially if you're fighting alone. Being able to put out that big AoE damage and burn really helps. And then moving on to the jewelry here, Divine and Health are must-haves, I think, for PvP. And then the last perk, I actually have Alacrity. After testing Alacrity, I find that it doesn't seem to apply to any of the weapon skill sources of haste. It only applies to my Keen Speed haste and the haste that I get from my tools. So yeah, it's not really the best perk, but it is something that I have at the moment. It's nice because I'll have a better uptime on the Keen Speed, and that is arguably the most important source of haste that this build has. But I would prefer to have something like Stamina Recovery here, or even something like Thrust or Fire Protection for some additional durability. Moving on to the ring, this is the perfect ring for the build. Hardy Keen Awareness and Burning. We can apply a lot of Burning if we hit someone with Incinerate. Very easily, we can put 5 stacks of Burning on them with it. And the 29% duration is just going to add quite a bit of additional damage to our fire attacks when they apply that Burning. Now, you can use the PvP reward track ring that gives you additional damage based on how many buffs your opponent has instead of Burning, and it also has Hardy and Keen Awareness. I think that's a great option if you want to focus a little bit more on the burst of this build. Both rings are really good for this kind of a setup. And then for the last piece here, I have got the Earring, Refreshing Toast Regen, must-haves for PvP, and then Refreshing Evasion as the third perk. Yeah, anything that you have for the third perk that you prefer will work here. And then let's take a look at the resists of this build. This is actually an important part of a PvP build that I think I've neglected a lot in my past builds. So taking a look at this guy, you can see we have a flat 5% damage reduction against most things. And then thrust damage, we have 20% thrust damage resistance and 11% fire damage resistance. This is because I believe this build's weakness is things like fire staff, bow, and musket. So definitely building against those sources of damage is going to make us a little bit better against something that we can struggle against. It allows us to get closer and on top of those kind of builds a lot safer than if we didn't have this additional resistance. It's really up to you if you want to run your resists like this. You could just run the flat 10% everything, but I do like the specialization because I feel like this build is very good against things that do slash and strike damage, and there aren't a lot of other sources of elemental damage outside of ice and void that are dangerous, and those are both very short-ranged elemental sources of damage. So for the most part, it's the long-ranged opponents that this build has to watch out for, and that's why I've made the resists like this. And for the consumables on this build, of course you want to use a health potion and the infused regen potion if you can. I'm using the oak flesh bomb, but the crystal dust is actually a good option as there's a lot of mages out in PvP right now. This is really just kind of situational, and you can slot whatever you think is going to help you more against a certain target. And then I've got the food in the middle. If you really wanted to, you could actually have both the oak flesh bomb and the elemental defense on your quick slot bar here and just drop the hearty meal altogether. And then you can use whichever you feel like is going to be more useful in the fight instead of having to slot it ahead of time. For the food on this build, I have the glazed bear with sauteed vegetables. You just want to reach those thresholds of 150 dex, 200 intelligence, and 150 con. So you are going to need food in order to do that on this build. And then, of course, I've got the strong honing stone. This one's just a cheaper option than the T5 honing stone and just gives 1% less weapon damage, but you do want to at least run the strong honing stone in PvP. And taking a look at the masteries of this build, starting off with the Rapier. If you guys have seen previous iterations of this setup, I haven't changed anything in the Rapier tree here. We use Riposte, Evade, and Flesh, the skills of choice, really good for survival and mobility, as well as excellent burst damage from the Riposte counter stun into the Rend. Evade is great for damage too, and Flesh is great for damage. I just like all three of these abilities because they have really good defensive and offensive utility. The important passives you want to get, of course, is Momentum for that additional damage after you use an ability. Very important to add that big burst after Evade, stacking with Omnidirectional Evade as well. Then I've got Swiftness, 3% haste when you land a hit with the Rapier, and this can stack up to 5 times. Really nice, just giving us more additional movement. Red Curtains, critical strikes reduce all cooldowns by 5%. Super important because Rapier has kind of long cooldowns on some of its better abilities now. And Controlled Breathing, gain 3 stamina on any hit. Very important for PvP to have as much stamina income as we can. And then Refreshing Strikes for a little bit more cooldown reduction just for landing a hit with the Rapier. And the last perk that I pick here is On Guard, 10% more damage when the target has over 50% health. You can pick either of these damage perks if you don't want to go for this one. So it's kind of up to the user there. And then taking a look at the Fire Staff tree, no real changes from the last iteration as well, but a little bit of a weird Fire Staff tree if you haven't seen something like this before. Starting off from the left-hand side, we've got Burnout, and then Incinerate and Empowering Fireball. So Fireball, I actually didn't take the last 2 parts of it here because these just do things like increase the burning field, which is not effective for PvP really, and give you a little bit of cooldown reduction and mana back. This is not going to impact the damage of Fireball, so I just felt like it's better to put the points elsewhere. And then the passives that I'm using on this build are largely focused on applying burns and increasing Fire Staff damage. Do get haste from combat speed as well, which is nice, just adding more sources of haste to this build. This build can actually hit the hard cap of 50% haste if you use one of your fire skills and it lands a crit. You'll get 10% from this, another 20% from the keen speed, and then when you swap to the front bar and use Evade, voila, you've got the 50% haste on this build. And then, of course, here we go, more burning stacks when you light attack. Burning lasts longer, very important. Let it burn, giving 10% fortify for 2 seconds whenever burn deals damage. Super important defensively, a very good passive for Fire Staff in PvP. And then Pyromania for a little bit more damage. On this side here, we definitely want to have the critical strike damage and the critical strike chance. Seeing as Fire Staff is kind of a critical weapon, it does a really good job in that regard. And then these last couple perks here, more additional damage if we haven't been hit, more burning on our light attacks. Holding a Fire Staff while above 50% mana will give us even more damage for the Empower. And then heavy attacks will reduce the Fire Staff cooldown by 10% on hit. I really like this perk because I use a lot of heavies on the Fire Staff myself. And there you go, guys. That is the build. Alright guys, let's get into that PvP commentary. I've got a few fights for you guys today for this build. There you see I try to go for the Incinerate. The enemy player getting through the grit by using the kick, which is a hard stun. I get good damage on him, however, try to go for the flesh through him. He manages to survive, and he goes into his triple shot on the bow. I hit him with the fireball there, and there's a beautiful Incinerate hitting both players, killing the first player there. And then this sword player hits me with the stun, and then 2 light attacks. Definitely beneficial for us because we catch him with the riposte right away and then flesh through him. And right off the bat, I think you guys can see the damage that this build has. It hits pretty hard in PvP. And this enemy spear player comes back again. There, when he uses this sweep, you see the grit on the fire staff doing work for us. And that move will actually heal us 20% of the damage we do. So that can help a lot for just surviving and draining some health from an opponent who maybe is a little unaware. I take a really nasty blast from the grenade on the ground there. Unfortunately, I didn't see it, and it staggers me into the combo from the other player there, and I'm forced to very quickly peel back behind here and heal up, and the enemy players end up following me around the corner. This guy goes into his berserk, starts just swinging light attacks with the hatchet, just begging me to go for the riposte. I hit him with a huge backstab off the riposte. He tries to get away, and there's the Incinerate to finish him off. And I go for the potion chug, and I end up getting shot. I think what I should have done instead is go for the evade into a double roll, break a bit of distance, and then maybe try to get the potion off. I might have survived. But moving on to the next clip here, I'm knocking on the door of the enemy outpost here, and this guy jumps down to fight me. I hit him with a nasty Incinerate, the burnout through him, and then the fireball, and there you see the combination damage from the fire staff. That guy goes down very fast. I get a riposte on this guy and then go for the backstab. Don't land the crit and still take out half of his health with that backstab. Hitting very hard against these guys. And this guy ends up just sitting at the top. So I just attack the door a little bit, trying to open it up and see if I can lure the players outside. And this guy ends up coming out. He goes for the stun on the spear. Unfortunately, I'm just out of range with the riposte. I land a huge heavy attack connection on the other player that jumps down into the fray there, and this guy goes for the bow 3-shot. I go for the burnout into him. Maybe not the best choice. I do manage to land the burnout though and put the dot on him, put a little bit of damage. And now we're just kind of waiting around the corner. This guy jumps in with this spear. I catch him with the riposte. Huge damage on that backstab. If you guys didn't see it, that was a 5k backstab on that guy. And then I killed him with the fireball. Go for the Incinerate afterwards. Both players going down there. I didn't even need to go for the Incinerate. And then I get inside the outpost here, and I start working on killing the spawn. This guy respawns, and I hit him with the riposte, and the backstab into the evade forward takes out all his health. I looked at the damage on that combo. That's over 7k damage. So he's a squishy player, but for us to just outright kill him from full health with that, very crazy. This next guy trying to escape. I get the poke in the back with the rapier, and now we've got a friendly player who shows up. He's throwing some healing circles down for me as well, and I just keep on the pressure on this spawner here. And the archer that just respawned goes for the multi-shot on the bow. That's going to plant his character, so I quickly get on top of him with my rapier and finish him off. And this guy managing to respawn just as I bring down the spawner, and he retreats out the side. I decide not to chase him because I do want to flip this for my team. And me and the healer stand on the spot. We manage to flip it, and these guys end up coming back. Now they're all in the doorway here. I go to the outside, get an Incinerate off. Great damage with it. I actually hit 2 players with it. Go for the burnout through. Big damage on the enemy player with the spear bow there, almost bringing him down. And you can see the burning ticks from my Incinerate just chewing the one guy in the back there. And the healer that was with me, he just pieces out right away. He runs out the back of the thing, so I'm all alone to fight these guys. I go for that Incinerate, and a bit of delay on the Incinerate when you use it. You can actually land a bit of a delayed attack, and there you see the guy just steps in at the last moment. He does take the burn from it. And then I get up to the top, burnout through everybody, and this is basically full kite mode here. We got to be pretty careful. They're going to smack me real hard if I get hit by something. A nice roll back through the group into the Incinerate. I hit almost everybody with that, and then I get the riposte. Unfortunately, I mess up the roll combo there because I'm just out of stam after landing that riposte, so the timing's a little bit off. And there's a very dangerous moment, getting caught by the gravity well, forced to use burnout, which has the wind-up on it. I do manage to escape, but I get caught again by the ice shower, try to bring down the enemy healer that's low health, And I find in these kind of situations where you got a lot of people chasing you, the more sporadic you can be and the more aggressive you can be, the more success you'll have. And there you see when I try to retreat and break some distance, it's not really working for me. I'm taking a lot of damage as I'm running in one direction. So I just try to put some damage into this Great Axe player. I managed to land the Incinerate. Unfortunately, he catches me with the Gravity Well. There's the Riposte as I go through the group. The Ice Gauntlet player just getting the Ice Shower as I land that Riposte. And then they kill me as I am unable to escape that in time. Moving on to the last fight here for you guys. I'm doing a little bit of open world PvP. Of course, in First Light, lots of PvP at this keep in general because it's a very desired buff. So I find you can pretty reliably get some nice fights here. And I run into 4 purple players. The 2 players come at me. 1 player from behind. He actually catches me off guard with this stagger. But I get a nice counter riposte into the Incinerate. And there's big damage off of the burnout through them as well. This enemy player doesn't heal up in time, and I get the pressure on the Rapier to finish him off, and there's the Fireball to land the finishing blow to down the player. I'm not an OPR, so I'm going to have to land that last hit in order to get the kill before they res them. And now I'm in a pretty dangerous spot here. I go for a little bit of a kite down the side. They throw down the Gravity Well. He just catches me, but I've got the Evade just coming up off cooldown there. I managed to break distance out of the Gravity Well. Evade, if you guys didn't know, if you use it while snared, it actually breaks the snare on you. And this includes in stuff like Ice Shower, so I'm finding that very useful for something like getting caught in that Gravity Well. And now I'm duking it out with this enemy Great Axe player at the top. I get good damage with the Incinerate. He decides to bail on that fight, so I jump down and keep trying to apply pressure here. The enemy archer from behind is just shooting some shots at me, but he's missing a lot of them. I'm moving in a good pattern too, but fortunately he hasn't landed anything super critical yet. Pulls out a Life Staff. What an interesting build. There you see he actually connects with the shot and he gets some pretty decent damage on me, so I feel like he's invested a little bit more in the bow than he is in the Life Staff. Again, caught by that Gravity Well. This time though, I go for the burnout early enough that it's not really dangerous. And a nice combo off the flesh there, and then evade right back into him to finish off the down player. And I get a good counter riposte on that player as I just retreat up to the top, heal up a little bit. There, I go for the Incinerate as they come up the stairs. I get good damage, but net, I don't think that was the best trade for me. They did get some damage into me too. And, well, with that, I will let you guys enjoy the rest of this fight as I say goodbye. I really hope you guys like this build. I feel like this patch, Firestaff Rapier, is maybe at the strongest point it's ever been. So a really good time to play this weapon combo in particular right now. And just in general, really liking the changes, especially to Firestaff. Of course, if you guys want to see a written guide to this build, you can find it on my website, pvpnewworld.com. If you guys want to catch me live, you can check me out on Twitch. Check out my Twitter if you want to keep up to date with me. And I feature the New World Top 5 battles, so if you have an awesome fight that you want to see featured on the channel, you can send that to Kristofer at pvpnewworld.com. This show is sponsored by What the Fast. It's a VPN for gamers. They can give you better ping to your favorite games. Free to try for the first month. There's a link down below for you guys. And last but not least, a massive thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon for supporting the show, keeping it going. Thank you everybody just for tuning in and watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope to see you all next time, and have a great night, everyone.